Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly dramatic historical myth that's been very deep in the pages of history. We are looking at the unheard saga of the Konark Sun Temple. And guys, this isn't just your standard tale about ancient architecture. No, it is a massive story packed with blinding ambition, literally impossible engineering, and a genuinely heartbreaking tragedy. I am so excited to guide you through this, so let's set the stage.
Why on earth would a 12-year-old boy leap to his death from the very peak of the world's grandest temple? That is the haunting mystery at the very core of today's story. I mean, what could possibly drive a child to climb to the top of this monumental architectural triumph, only to end his own life? To really understand this immense sacrifice, we need to rewind the clock a bit and understand the incredibly high stakes and the massive egos that set this entire tragedy in motion.
So, our story actually kicks off way back in the 13th century with the Kalinga Empire. We're introduced to this brave, highly visionary ruler named King Narasimha of the Longala dynasty. Now, the king had just been locked in this incredibly fierce 3-year-long war against Ganapati, who was the powerful ruler of the Kakatiya dynasty. But ultimately, the Kakatiya king was completely defeated. King Narasimha returned home totally victorious, bringing back just immense wealth and glory. And as you'd expect, a massive grand welcome was organized at his palace to celebrate the monumental win.
But you know how family dynamics can be, right? When the king returned, his mother, Queen Kasturi Devi, proudly embraced him, and she reminded him of the incredibly grand legacy built by his father, which was the famous Jagannath Temple at Puri. But she didn't just want to congratulate him, she actually had a challenge for him. She wanted him to surpass his father's legacy by building an unprecedented, even more magnificent sun temple at Arkakshetra in Konark.
Okay, but why a sun temple? And why specifically in Konark? Well, to figure that out, we have to look at a pretty fascinating mythological timeline. According to the lore, Lord Krishna's beautiful son, Samba, used to regularly harass the sage Narada. So to teach him a lesson, Narada tricked Samba into bathing with gopis. Well, when Krishna found out his son was playing in the water with women who were considered equivalent to his mother, he was absolutely furious. Krishna actually cursed Samba with leprosy, completely destroying his beautiful body. Narada then advised Samba to go to Konark, which is where the sun's first rays fall, to pray. After 12 grueling years of penance, with literally no food or water, at the Chandrabhaga River, the sun god appeared. He told Samba to bathe in the river to find a black stone idol, and he miraculously cured him. After being completely cured, Samba built a small temple to honor the sun god at that exact spot. And this brings us right back to Queen Kasturi Devi's motivation. She told her son, "When I was childless for many years, I prayed at that very sun temple, and I was blessed with you as my son." So this was her deep, personal connection to the site. And deeply moved by his mother's words, King Narasimha basically pledged right then and there to build the world's most magnificent temple on that exact spot. To fulfill this monumental promise, the king spared absolutely no expense. He handed the responsibility over to the famous sculptor Sibai Samantare and his colleague Bisu Maharana. They drew up a beautiful model of the temple, and the king was so overwhelmed by it that he ordered construction to start immediately. And to pull this off, a staggering 1,200 highly skilled artisans were drafted for the project. Think about that for a second. That's a massive workforce for the 13th century, and they worked continuously for 12 long years. But building an ancient wonder of the world is, well, it's not exactly a walk in the park. The plan was to build the temple at a place called Padmatola Ganda on the banks of the Chandrabhaga River, exactly where the sun's first rays would hit its massive peak. So they brought in these incredibly heavy stones from far away, loaded them onto flat wooden boats, and started dropping them right into the middle of the river to create a flat foundation. But it turned into a massive engineering disaster. The raging water just washed those heavy stones away like they were pebbles. No matter how many stones they threw in, the fierce current just took them all.
So the chief architect, Sibai Samantare, was obviously deeply worried about how to tame this wild river. One day, he's sitting deep in thought on the porch of a hut, and an old woman serves him a bowl of hot millet porridge. In a rush, he sticks his hand right into the middle of the steaming hot food and completely burns himself. The old woman just laughed. She told him he was eating from the middle, exactly like he was trying to fill the river from the middle. Now, according to the lore, that woman was actually the goddess Ma Ramachandi in disguise, delivering a crucial, game-changing epiphany. You don't start in the treacherous middle, you build safety from the edges.
Thanks to that simple, everyday domestic lesson, Sibai formulated a completely new strategy. Step 1.
Drop the heavy stones, starting from the riverbanks, not the middle. Step 2, gradually fill inwards, slowly moving towards the center. And step 3, eventually secure a stable, flat foundation. And you know what? This exact strategy worked beautifully. They finally conquered the river, and the construction of the magnificent temple pushed forward rapidly.
Now keep in mind, the king had ordered that literally no one was allowed to go home until the entire project was finished. So those 1,200 artisans toiled away for 12 years. They successfully built the grand structure, but then they hit a massive wall. The final challenge was installing this huge magnetic dome, known as the Kalash, at the very peak of the temple. And despite all their intense efforts and 12 years of otherwise flawless work, the dome simply would not fit into its proper place. It just wouldn't work.
The delay caused this incredibly dark cloud of despair to fall over the entire camp. King Narasimhadeva, totally out of patience at this point, delivered a truly terrifying ultimatum. He declared if the Kalash is not placed by tomorrow morning, all 1,200 artisans will be beheaded. The king's massive ego and total impatience suddenly cast a very real shadow of death over every single worker who had just dedicated over a decade of their lives to his vision. The artisans were instantly thrown into sheer panic. Okay, take a step back for a second and notice this wild, almost mystical, reoccurring motif weaving through the whole story. The number 12. Remember? Samba did 12 years of harsh penance. It took 12 years of relentless construction. There were 1,200 artisans now facing execution. And exactly at this moment of total, paralyzing despair, a 12-year-old boy named Dharmapada enters our story. Dharmapada was actually the son of the chief architect Bisu Maharana. Because Bisu had left for the construction site when his wife was still pregnant, Dharmapada had grown up having never even seen his father. Raised reading complex architectural manuscripts, the boy had literally mastered Odia temple architecture by the time he turned 12. So, for his 12th birthday, he begged his mother for just one gift: to finally meet his dad. Armed with some fruits from their garden and his loyal dog Bilya, so his father would actually recognize them, Dharmapada made the long journey to the construction site.
But when he finally arrived, the camp was definitely not in a celebratory mood. Balya the dog immediately recognized Bisu Maharana, and the boy finally got to embrace his father. But Dharmapada quickly sensed the deep, heavy anxiety among the artisans and asked why they were all so terrified. When he learned about the king's death threat regarding the dome, the young genius confidently stepped up. He asked his reluctant father for permission, quickly climbed all the way to the top of the temple, analyzed the structural error, and, using the deep knowledge he had gained from those manuscripts, made some crucial adjustments. In mere moments, the Kalash was installed perfectly. He actually fixed it.
And guys, as soon as that Kalash was set in place, a true miracle occurred. The incredible power of the magnets hidden inside the dome caused the majestic stone idol of the sun god to magically suspend, literally floating in mid-air inside the temple. It's like something out of a fantasy novel. Down below, the artisans erupted in sheer joy and pride. Their 12 years of intense labor had culminated in a literal floating miracle.
But human nature, right? That joy was incredibly short-lived. A wave of dark panic began to spread among a group of the artisans. Their logic was absolutely terrifying. They thought, the king will realize a 12-year-old did what 1,200 of us couldn't. He will think we weren't doing our jobs properly, and he will execute us anyway. Out of pure, desperate fear for their own lives, some artisans even started arguing that the boy Dharmapada needed to be silenced forever.
Bisu Maharana was completely horrified by this and firmly opposed anyone hurting his son, but he was painfully torn between his love as a father and his duty as the chief architect to his men. The tension in the camp was just suffocating. Young Dharmapada looked around and saw the immense turmoil his incredible success had caused his father and the rest of the workers. With tears in his eyes, he made a silent, truly heartbreaking choice. He pushed his way through the tense crowd and climbed back up to the towering peak of the temple just as the sun began to rise. Standing proudly on the very Kalash he had just fixed, bathed in the first morning rays of the sun god, Dharmapada leaped from the pinnacle right into the deep blue waters of the Chandrabhaga River. It is a devastating moment. A young genius, a child who had just brought supreme glory to Odia architecture and solved an impossible puzzle, sacrificed his own life simply so 1,200 innocent artisans could keep theirs.
Later that morning, King Narasimhadeva arrived at the temple. Completely oblivious to the horrific tragedy that had just occurred, he was utterly mesmerized by the floating idol of the sun god, and he endlessly praised his chief architects. Thrilled with the result, the king loudly declared that the temple's inauguration, the Pran Pratishtha, would take place on a specific date, Magha Shukla Saptami. Now, Sabai Samantaray desperately warned the king that while the date was generally good, it was the absolute wrong astronomical time to inaugurate this specific temple. But the king, blinded by his own massive arrogance, he completely ignored the warning and forced the ceremony forward anyway.
And the universe pushed back almost immediately. The consequences of ignoring that warning were swift and highly mysterious. Right after the forced inauguration, inexplicable disasters began striking the temple. First, a massive stone lion just crashed to the ground out of nowhere. Then, the foundational stones themselves began to inexplicably crumble and fall apart. The king finally realized his architect had been right, but of course it was too late. Over the following years, the magnificent structure deteriorated, and eventually the surrounding area was swallowed entirely by dense, wild forests.
So today, we are left with only the haunting, broken ruins of what was meant to be the world's grandest temple. Which brings us to a really lingering, powerful question to end on. Does the pursuit of forced glory ultimately invite its own destruction? I mean, we saw a king whose ego demanded a marvel, a 12-year-old genius whose brilliant sacrifice saved 1,200 lives, and an arrogant decision that led to a ruined legacy. Think about how ambition, ego, and sacrifice all intertwine in this incredible narrative from the source material. It's truly something to reflect on. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the marvels we see today.